Let's bow our heads for prayer. Our Father and our God, what a joy it is to be in your presence. And how wonderful it is that you have given us your word, which is a sure compass in a world without any guidance, apparently, as we observe it. We thank you that you're seated upon the throne of the world, and everything is under your control, even when things seem to be spinning out of control. And Father, we especially thank you for your word. We ask that you will speak to us through this word today, that you will open our minds and give us understanding, and you will open our hearts that we might receive the seed of truth. And we thank you, Father, for hearing and for answering our prayer, for we ask it in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. When scholars study the life of Jesus, they usually divide that study into three specific parts or segments. The first part, of course, is the life of Jesus, the aspects of the life of Jesus. The second aspect, or the second thing that they focus on, is the miracles of Jesus. And in the third place, they focus on the parables or the teachings of Jesus. So basically, they divide the study of Christ into three sections: his life, his parables, and his miracles. Now, we're going to notice in our study today that the life of Jesus in itself is a parable. And we're going to discover that also all of the miracles of Jesus were also parables. In other words, Jesus not only performed his miracles to help those who were in need, Jesus performed his miracles because those miracles then became parables of deep spiritual truth. Perhaps I can give you some examples as we begin our study today. You remember the man who was born blind. The story is found in John chapter 9. At the end of the story, Jesus plays on the idea of blindness. And he says, this man has seen because he has discerned the Messiah. But you, the Pharisees, say that you see, but you really are blind. In other words, Jesus took this miracle to teach a profound spiritual truth. Then you have the healing of lepers. Leprosy was a symbol of sin. You see, Jesus not only healed the lepers so that they could get out of the leprosarium and carry on their lives as usual in a normal fashion, but he healed leprosy to show the need of healing the human soul from the terrible leprosy of sin. In other words, those miracles had a deep spiritual dimension. The same when Jesus healed the paralytics. He not only wanted to teach that he has power to heal those who have paralyzed legs, but he also wanted to show that he has the power to heal those whose lives are paralyzed by the deadly virus of sin. We have the healing of the 5,000 as another example. After Jesus fed 5,000 men, not counting women and children, Jesus began speaking about being the bread that came from heaven, the manna that came from heaven. Now he's going to take his miracle of feeding the people with physical food, and he's going to show that that is an illustration of feeding the soul with spiritual food. The same thing with the calming of the storms on the lake. There's a couple of episodes that we find in the Gospels where Jesus calmed the storm, where the disciples were terrorized by the thunder and the lightning. Well, the fact is that Jesus not only calmed the storms to save the physical lives of the disciples in the boat, but he also calmed the storms to show that when there are storms in our lives, Jesus can bring calm and he can bring peace to our own individual lives. In other words, what I'm saying is that the parables of Jesus are not the only teachings that we have, are not the only parables, so to speak, but the miracles of Jesus are also acted parables. They are living parables, if you please. You have, for example, the story of the cursing of the fig tree. That's what we know as an acted parable. It was actually something that did. It was a miracle because he cursed the fig tree, and the next day the fig tree had dried up from its roots. That doesn't happen overnight. But Jesus was trying to teach what was going to happen with the Hebrew nation. So we are going to study today two miracles of Jesus which need to be understood not only as miracles but also as parables. We're going to discuss two fishing expeditions that are mentioned in the Gospels. Now, one of these fishing expeditions took place at the beginning of the ministry of Jesus, and the other fishing expedition took place at the very conclusion of the ministry of Jesus, in fact, after the resurrection of Jesus. Now, there are several symbols in these stories that I want to share with you as we begin our study. First of all, in both of these stories, we have the Sea of Galilee. Now, in Scripture, the sea represents multitudes, nations, tongues, and peoples. You can see that in Isaiah chapter 17, 12, and 13. Very clearly, the sea represents the multitudes of the world. And then, of course, you have the boat in these stories. The boat, I would suggest, represents the church. And then, of course, you have the fish. And, of course, the fish represent the specific people that are found in all of the nations of the world. So, in other words, the sea represents the world, and the fish represent the people that are in the world, the specific individuals within the nations, multitudes, tongues, and peoples. So the fish represent those who are lost. The fishermen represent those who are in the church who should seek out souls for Jesus Christ. The net, which is cast out, represents the preaching of the gospel. And then we're going to notice, at least in the first story, actually in both stories, we're going to notice that the right side of the boat has very important significance. And then one aspect which is not found in these two stories, but it's found in other parables of Jesus, is where the fish are brought to the shore, and then once they're at the shore, you have the work of separating the good fish from the bad fish. Of course, that would represent the final judgment. After all of the souls have been brought into the church, then they're taken to the shore, and the righteous are separated from the unrighteous. We're not going to focus on that particular aspect in our study today. So once again, reviewing, the sea represents the world. The boat represents the church. The fish represent the individuals in the nations of the world. The fishermen represent those who have accepted Jesus and are in the church. The net represents the gospel. And the right side of the boat, we're going to notice, I'm not going to tell you yet what it represents, but the right side of the boat has very important significance. And the bringing of the fish to the shore for the final separation represents the judgment. Now, I would like to read the passage where we find the first miracle that we are going to study today. It's found in Luke chapter 5 and verses 1 through 11. Luke chapter 5 and verses 1 through 11. And I'm going to read the whole passage so we can catch the picture of what is taking place in this story. Once again, Luke chapter 5 and verses 1 through 11. It says this: "So it was, as the multitude pressed about him to hear the word of God, that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret, and saw two boats standing by the lake. But the fishermen had gone from them and were washing their nets." In other words, the boats had no one in them because the fishermen were washing the nets. Verse 3, "Then he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the multitudes from the boat. When he had stopped speaking, he said to Simon, 'Launch out into the deep, and let down your nets for a catch.' But Simon answered and said to him, 'Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the net.' And when they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their net was breaking. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' feet, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will catch men." So when they had brought their boats to land, they forsook all and followed him. So this is the first miracle that we are going to take a look at in our study today. Now, the first thing that I want us to notice about this miracle is the prohibitive set of circumstances that exist when Jesus told the disciples to throw out, or Peter more specifically, to throw out the net. Notice what we find in verse 4 once again. And we're not going to go in chronological order because I want to get the lessons that God wants us to learn from this parable. So I'm reorganizing it a little bit. It says there in verse 4, when he had stopped speaking, that is, when Jesus had stopped speaking from the boat, he said to Simon, "Launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." Now, the circumstances were prohibitive. And you say, why is that? Because the story makes it very clear that Jesus told Simon to do this in the daytime. Now, anyone who lives over in the land of Israel knows that you do not go fishing with nets in the daytime because the fish can see the net when the light is out. And so the circumstances were not ideal for fishing. By the way, when I grew up in Venezuela, my parents would take us almost on a yearly vacation to an island state in Venezuela called the island of Margarita. And one of our favorite pastimes when we went to the island, we usually stay about a week, and we'd actually camp out in a tent on the beach and under the palm trees, and had a wonderful time. Some of the greatest memories that I have of my childhood is going on vacation with the family. But one of our favorite pastimes was to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go to a beach which was called El Tirano, which in English is the tyrant. And we'd arrive probably about 4:30, 4:45, and we would observe the fishermen coming into shore with their boats while it was still dark. It was amazing. They actually had several boats cooperating in the endeavor. They would throw out the nets all around the bay, and then they would pull in the nets, and they would bring them to the shore. And there were all kinds of fish, and not only fish, but they had octopuses, and they had starfish, and they had all different kinds of marine animals caught in the nets. And it was just so much fun to stand there at the beach and see these nets just totally maxed out, sharks too, totally maxed out with fish, and then to see the fishermen distribute the fish among themselves. But they never would go fishing in the daytime. Whenever they would cast out the nets, they would go at night, and we would have to arrive early in the morning before the sun came out. And so we know that fishermen simply do not go out to fish with nets in the morning. And yet Jesus says to Peter, in the light of day, go out and throw out the net. Now, I like to think a little bit about what Peter might have thought in his mind. He might have thought, well, you know, Jesus, you are a carpenter. You know about woodworking. I am a fisherman. I know about fishing. I don't know whether he thought that, but it becomes very clear in the story that Peter felt that Jesus was asking something which was not reasonable or not logical, humanly speaking. Now, I want you to notice verse 5 and the first part of the verse. We're only going to read the first part of verse 5. It says, but Simon answered and said to him, Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. Can you imagine being out there all night with their nets and they had caught absolutely nothing? You know, a few years ago, this is actually in May of the year 2001, just a few months before the 9/11 event here in the United States, that I took a trip to the Middle East, and one of the places that we visited was Tyre, which is mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 26 and 27. And we actually went to the port there where the fishermen were coming in. And some of them had very few fish in their nets, but at least they had some. You know, there were others who had many. There were some who had only a few. But we didn't see one fisherman that didn't have at least one fish in the net. So this was very unusual. You know, it wasn't only a miracle of fishing all these fish later on, but it was a miracle that they had not fished even one fish all night. And so we find Peter saying to Jesus, look, it's daytime. We've toiled all night. We haven't caught anything at night when you're supposed to fish. So it doesn't make sense. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think that Peter and the disciples knew fishing backwards and forwards? Of course they did. Had they worked hard all night? Yes, it says here that they had worked hard all night. Did they know the right time to fish? They sure did. Did they know the best places to fish? Absolutely. Did they use the best techniques to fish? No doubt whatsoever. That was their profession. Did they have state-of-the-art equipment to fish with? No doubt whatsoever. And yet, in spite of the fact that they had worked hard, they had worked all night, they knew fishing because it was their profession, they were fishing at the right time, they were fishing in the best places, they were using the best techniques, they were using state-of-the-art technology. The Bible tells us that they had fished absolutely nothing. What does this teach us? What it does is teach us that success in fishing is not guaranteed by knowledge, by experience, by methods, or by technology. There was a greater secret to fishing than all of these things. There was something missing that night, and in spite of the fact that they had everything necessary to have a successful fishing expedition, that one missing element did not allow them to be successful in their expedition. In a few moments, I'm going to tell you what element was missing, and no matter what they had, what knowledge and what equipment and the right place and the right time and so on, they were not able to fish absolutely anything. And yet we find that Peter decided that he would obey the command of Jesus. Notice verse 5 once again, and we'll go on to verse 6. It says in verse 5, but Simon answered and said to him, Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. And now notice this. Nevertheless, are you catching what he's saying? He's saying, we haven't caught anything. We've done everything just right. Right time, right place, right techniques, right equipment. He says, nevertheless, this is the key, at your word, I will let down the net. In other words, if you command me to let down the net, that's what I'm going to do. At your word, I will let down the net. And then notice verse 6. And when they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their net was breaking. Now, as we examine these verses that I just read, we notice that Peter was obeying the word of Jesus, even though it appeared to be the most ridiculous thing in the world. He trusted the word, and he threw out the net, and he was successful. No matter how absurd what Jesus had commanded appeared. Do you know, as we examine the Gospels, the Word of God has power to perform that which it asks to do. In other words, all of the biddings of Jesus are also enablings of Jesus. When He commands to do something, He also gives the power so that the command can be fulfilled. You know, we have, for example, the centurion that came to Jesus and he said, you know, my son is sick. He's going to die. And Jesus says, okay, I'll come to your house and I'll heal him. And the centurion says, no need. No need to come to my house. He says, you know, I'm a man of authority, and I say the word, and my servants, they go out and they do what I tell them to do. He says, so all you have to do is speak the word, and my servant will be healed. And lo and behold, the story tells us that Jesus says, your faith has made your son whole. And when the centurion went home, he found that his son had been healed. The power of the word. And this man did not stay to argue with Jesus and say, oh, come on. You know that just saying that he's going to be healed isn't going to heal him. He believed the word of God. He went home and he found that his son had been healed, contrary to what appeared to be logical and reasonable. Now you'll notice that fishing is a cooperative effort between Jesus and the disciples. And the secret to the success in fishing was obedience to the word. Allow me to read you this statement from Christ's Object Lessons, page 333. Christ's Object Lessons, page 333. Ellen White says this: as the will of man cooperates with the will of God, it becomes omnipotent. That's powerful. As the will of man cooperates with the will of God, it becomes omnipotent. Whatever is to be done at His command may be accomplished in His strength. Did you catch that? Once again, whatever is to be done at His command may be accomplished in His strength. So He not only commands, He also gives what? The strength. And then she ends in a phrase that we all know real well: all His biddings are enablings. You see, the word of Jesus has power. And not only did His word have power to attract the fish so that Peter and his fellow workers could have this miraculous catch of fish, but the word of Jesus, when He says go out and fish for souls, His command is not only a command, but it carries with it the power to be successful in the fishing, not of fish, but in the fishing of human souls. You know, I've never been able to understand, you know, there's some people in this church that love to go fishing. And I'm not going to mention any names, but they just love to go fishing. It's the passion of their lives. But, you know, when you say, okay, well, let's go out and give some Bible studies and let's go out and reach out for souls, you know, the enthusiasm suddenly disappears. Does that say something about our priorities? If we get more excited about going to fish than to go and fish human beings? You say, well, Pastor, I don't know what to say. People aren't going to pay attention to what I'm going to say. Let me ask you, if Jesus commands us to fish, do you think that He's also going to give us the power to fish? Of course He is. This story shows that His biddings are enablings. He commanded, and then He fulfilled His command. Now there's another very important point, which I've left to this moment because it is the critical and central issue in this story. Not only were the disciples able to fish because they obeyed the command of Jesus, and the power of Jesus enacted the command, but there's a specific reason why, when the disciples had toiled all night, they were unsuccessful in their fishing expedition. They say, why were they unsuccessful at night and when they were supposed to fish, and why were they successful in the daytime when they were not supposed to fish? Well, yes, they obeyed the word of Jesus, but there's more. Notice once again verse 3, Luke chapter 5 and verse 3. Here we have the key, and it's mentioned twice. It says, then he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's. So where was Jesus while they went fishing that night? Was He in the boat? No, He wasn't in the boat. He was someplace else, maybe the shore, maybe at home. But it says, then he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the multitudes what? From the boat. So where is Jesus now in the story? He's in the boat. Where was he that night? He was not in the boat. Is it just perhaps the case that the reason why they were not successful in their fishing expedition is because Jesus wasn't in the boat? Allow me to read you this very interesting statement that we find in the book The Desire of Ages, page 249, where Ellen White is commenting about this story, which is a miracle and also a parable. Remember, this is a parable as well. She says there, during that sad night on the lake, when they were separated from Christ, notice, when they were separated from Christ, the disciples were pressed hard by unbelief and weary with fruitless toil. But his presence kindled their faith and brought them joy and success. What was it that brought success? The presence of whom? Presence of Jesus. Then she says, so it is with us. Apart from Christ, our work is fruitless, and it is easy to distrust and murmur. But when he is near, and when we labor under his direction, notice, when he's near and we labor under his direction, that is by his command, we rejoice in the evidence of his power. It is Satan's work to discourage the soul. It is Christ's work to inspire with faith and hope. So the reason why they were successful in the daytime, contrary to all circumstances, is because, first of all, they obeyed the command of Jesus, and the commands of Jesus become also enablings, but they also had the presence of Jesus in the boat. Now the question is, what about that second story of a miraculous fishing expedition? Does that story also teach the same lesson as this first story? The answer is yes. In fact, the story at the end of the Gospel of John, after the resurrection of Jesus, where Peter and his co-laborers had this miraculous fishing expedition, Ellen White says in Desire of Ages that it was a reenactment of the first call that Jesus gave to Peter and the disciples. You see, when Jesus called Peter and his fellow laborers in this first story in Luke chapter 5, we're going to notice in a few moments that they left their nets and they went with Jesus to fish men. But then at the end of the ministry of Jesus, they were disappointed because Jesus died, and even after Jesus resurrected, they went back to fishing again. And so it was necessary for Jesus once again to underline the story. Listen, folks, I haven't called you to fish fish. I have called you to fish men. Now notice John chapter 21, this second fishing expedition, and the lesson which it teaches. The secret of success in fishing, not fishing fish, but fishing human beings. It says in Luke 21 and verse 1, after these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. And in this way he showed himself. Now it's going to explain how. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. They said to him, we are going with you also. They went out and immediately got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. See the similarity? Why didn't they catch anything? Let's continue reading. Verse 4. But when the morning had now come, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Then Jesus said to them, children, have you any food? They answered him, no. And he said to them, cast the net. Now notice this. Cast the net on the right side of the boat. Which side were they casting the net on? They were casting the net on the left-hand side of the boat, according to this. Jesus says, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast, and now they were not able to draw it in because of the multitude of fish. Now, what a strange story. So all of the fish were gathered where? On the right side of the boat. You say, now why is that? Notice Desire of Ages, page 811. Desire of Ages, page 811. It says, and Jesus had a purpose in bidding them cast their net on the right side of the ship. On that side, he stood upon the shore. What was the difference? Who wasn't on the left? Jesus. Where was Jesus on the shore? On the right-hand side of the boat. And Jesus attracts fish. Notice what she continues saying. That was the side of faith. If they labored in connection with him, by his divine power combining with their human effort, they could not fail of success. Makes me remember the passage in John chapter 12 and verses 31 to 33, where Jesus said this, now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will what? Will draw all peoples to myself. This he said, signifying by what death he would die. Who is it that attracts the fish? It is Jesus who attracts the fish. You remember that verse? Very short one, but very meaningful. In John chapter 15 and verse 5, where Jesus says, without me ye can do what? Without me ye can do nothing. And in this story it became clear they were fishing on the wrong side of the boat because Jesus was not on that side of the boat. In other words, the fish were answering the call of their Creator. Now I want you to notice something very important. The fish were not attracted to the fishermen. The fish were not attracted to the state-of-the-art boat. The fish were not attracted to the upbeat programming in the boat. The fish were not attracted because felt needs were being met in the boat. The fish were attracted to the boat because Jesus was in the boat. So do you want a full church? Don't waste your time giving people coffee and donuts or veggie coffee and donuts if it's the case of an Adventist church. Don't think that you have to have the best contemporary Christian music. Don't think that you have to have all types of seminars to meet people's felt wants. You notice I didn't say felt needs, I said felt wants. Don't think that by remodeling the sanctuary, people are going to be attracted to the boat. These stories teach us that what attracts the fish, what attracts the souls, is the presence of Jesus in the boat. And the boat represents the church. And so it is the presence of Jesus in the church which attracts people to the church. Now there's another lesson that we learn from this story. It's found in Luke chapter 5 and verse 7. By the way, did you notice here that you have a cooperative effort? Did you notice that you have divine power and human effort here? Yes? Who attracted the fish? Jesus. Do you know that there's some people these days that say, oh, you know, just reveal the character of Jesus and people will jump into church? Let me ask you, did the fish jump into the boat? No. Did Jesus attract the fish to the realm of the boat? Yes, he did. But what did the disciples have to do? They had to throw out the nets and they had to pull in the nets, which represents the preaching of the gospel. Some people say, oh, you know, if you have a loving church, people will just flock to the church and you won't even have to have evangelism. It's called love evangelism. Well, the fact is that these stories tell us that Jesus attracts the souls to the realm of the church, but the church must preach the gospel, must throw out the net to bring in the fish that Jesus attracts. In other words, there is a combination of divine power in attracting the fish and human effort. Now, you remember that we've studied previously how the Godhead functions. God the Father, His Son, and the Holy Spirit, and the angelic host. Do you know actually what happened, just to explain to you the technique that was used by Jesus? Jesus stands on the side where the boat is, where the right side of the boat is, and who do you suppose is working to shoo, if you speak, all of the fish to the right side of the boat? The Holy Spirit. Through what? Through the ministration of the angels. That's right. Who do you suppose attracted the fish to the boat in the daytime so that they were surrounding the boat in the first story? There's no doubt whatsoever that Jesus is attracting them, but they're actually being pressed to where the boat is by the ministration of what? By the ministration of the angels. Success in soul winning, folks, depends on divine power and human effort. It means that we must not just pray, but we must pray and we must work. You know, I know two churches, and I'm not going to tell you where, but one of them was an English-speaking church, and another one was a Spanish-speaking church. And the English-speaking church would get together every Sabbath afternoon for about an hour, and they would have a season of prayer, asking the Lord to please bring the souls to the church. And then there was the other church, the Spanish church. And by the way, the Hispanic churches are growing much faster than the Anglo churches as a general rule. But the Spanish church, you know, they would also gather together on Sabbath afternoon, and they would have a season of prayer for 15 or 20 minutes, and then they would go out knocking on doors. Let me ask you, which church do you suppose got full? It was the Spanish church. Because it's not enough to pray, Lord, give us souls. We need to pray, Lord, give us souls. Then we need to obey His command to throw out the net, to preach the gospel, to knock on doors, and to reach people for Jesus Christ. It's not enough to just pray. It's not enough to just give a good testimony. There has to be active labor. This takes effort, and it takes time. By the way, have you ever noticed that Jesus in Matthew 9, 37 and 38, if you want to go with me there, Matthew chapter 9, verses 37 and 38, you remember that He spoke about the fields being white for harvest, and there's a lot of people just waiting to be brought in. I want you to notice that He doesn't pray, oh, Father, we need more power. What does He say? Send us more what? More laborers. The power is there. What does He need? He needs more men to cast out the net. Notice what it says in Matthew 9, verses 37 and 38. Then He said to His disciples, the harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Who produces a plentiful harvest? The power of God, right? Let me ask you this. Can you plant a field full of corn and by the power of God have the corn grow and have great big ears of corn? What would happen if you didn't go through with the tractor or by hand and harvest all the corn? It would go to waste, right? All the divine power in the world would be of no benefit. And so Jesus is saying, plant the seed, I'll cause the growth, and then with the net of the gospel, harvest these people and bring them into the boat, bring them into the church. And so it says in Matthew 9, verse 37, then He said to His disciples, the harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray the Lord that He gives you more power to fish. No, that's not what it says. Therefore pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into His what? Into His harvest. So in other words, what Jesus needs, He has all the power in the world. He doesn't need more power. He needs more people that will obey His command, and through the presence of Jesus will throw out the net, the preaching of the gospel, to bring the people into the boat, which is the church. Now there's a very important lesson over and above this. You see, success in fishing not only depends on the power of God and human effort, but it also involves cooperation among the people that are in different boats. You say, now how's that? Notice Luke chapter 5 and verse 7. Luke chapter 5 and verse 7. Was this fishing expedition extremely successful, even to the point that the nets of that one boat were breaking? Yes, so what did they do? They called the guys in the other boat. In other words, this was a cooperative effort between the people in one boat and the people in another boat. Notice what it says there in Luke 5, verse 7. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came, and notice, and filled both the boats, so that they began to what? So that they began to sink. Let me ask you, are there plenty of fish in the seas around Fresno to fill all of the boats? Absolutely. So do we need to be territorial and say, you know, we want only my boat to be full, and we want all the fish to come into to be brought into my boat? No. You see, fishing, success in fishing souls, depends on divine power, human beings casting out the net, but also because the fishing is so successful, the cooperation of all of the other boats that are in the area to bring the souls in. Now notice Luke chapter 5, verses 8 through 10. You know, after this very successful fishing expedition, it would have been very easy for Peter to do what? To brag, right? Would have been very easy for Peter to say, have you seen what I fished? Have you seen all the fish that I've caught? Wow! And I did it in the daytime, believe it or not. How did Peter react when he was successful in bringing all of these fish into the boat? Notice Luke chapter 5 and verse 8. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. So to whom did Peter give the credit of this very successful fishing expedition? He gave the credit to Jesus. He recognized that he was a sinful man. He recognized that in himself there was no virtue and there was no power. You know, in the Adventist church, it becomes very common for people to compete for numbers. Oh, you know, my conference had the highest number of baptisms in the whole union. Or, my church had the most baptisms of all of the churches in the city. Or I, as the pastor of Fresno Central Church, had more baptisms than all of the other pastors in town. You know, it becomes very common in the Adventist church to have this spirit of competition, you know, the numbers game. But this story teaches us that any fish that are brought into the church through the preaching of the gospel are not because of our power and our wisdom and our technique. It is because of the miraculous power of Jesus. And listen, folks, no matter how prohibitive the circumstances, you know, there's some people who say, oh, that's a very difficult field. You know, I remember I had the privilege of pastoring in Quincy, Illinois. And near Quincy, Illinois is an area where the Mormons, both the reorganized Mormons and the traditional Mormon church, have headquarters. And you know, when I was called to go there, people would tell me, oh, you're going to go to Quincy and Warsaw? They say, oh, that's a difficult territory. I mean, it's like banging your head against the wall. Well, do you know, God is a God of miracles in the most prohibitive circumstances. There are not bad territories. There are just fishermen that are too afraid to go out and cast the net and fish. You know, if Jesus commands us to fish, He will give us the success along with the command. Now I want you to notice Luke chapter 5 and verses 9 through 11. Luke chapter 5 verses 9 through 11. After they caught all of these fish, what would you have thought that they would have done? Of course, the first thing that they would do would be to go to the marketplace, right? Say, wow, look at, we're going to make a bundle here. That's not what they did. Notice what we find in verse 9. And Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on you will catch men. So, notice, so when they had brought their boats to land, they went to the marketplace and sold everything, and then they forsook all and followed him. That's not what it says. In the Gospels, time and again, we're told that, for example, Levi Matthew, it says straightway, which is a good King James word, straightway. That means immediately he left all. And what did he do? He followed the master. Here it says, verse 11, so when they had brought their boats to land, they forsook all and followed him. You see, for them, their occupations, their activities, their pastimes, their financial success was secondary to the task of fishing. Nothing was to stand in the way of fishing. Should that be the case also with the church? Absolutely. Nothing should stand in the way of fishing for the master. Not fishing fish, but fishing souls. You know, Jesus spoke about the hidden treasure. He says that when this individual went to the field and dug up this treasure, he sold everything that he had so that he could purchase the treasure. The same with the man the merchant who went searching for pearls. When he found this very precious pearl, we're told in the Bible that he went and sold everything so that he could acquire the pearl. Here we find that the disciples, when they were successful in fishing, they left everything. And they decided that they would go on a more important endeavor, and that was to fish, not fish, but men. Before we bring this sermon to a close, I would like us to notice a very important lesson that we find in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 4 and verse 19. This is the parallel passage to Luke chapter 5 about this first miraculous fishing expedition. Matthew chapter 4 and verse 19. It's not a long verse, but it has a very important lesson. It says there, Jesus is speaking to the fishermen after they've fished this great number of fish. Follow me, and I will teach you how to fish, when to fish, and where to fish. Is that what the verse says? No. He doesn't say, I will teach you how to fish, when to fish, where to fish. Notice how it's expressed. Follow me, and I will what? I will make you fishers of men. That's a very important point. Jesus isn't saying, I'm going to exemplify to you how to fish. He's saying, I am going to empower you to fish. He doesn't say, I will show you how to fish, I will show you when to fish, I will show you where to fish, I will show you what techniques to use. He says, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. In other words, it's connection with Jesus that gives us success in fishing for human beings. Now, do you know when this whole story was actually fulfilled? This story that is found in Luke chapter 5 and also the one in John chapter 21 finds its ultimate fulfillment on the day of Pentecost. You say, how is this? Well, let's illustrate it. Let me ask you, who was the fisherman on the day of Pentecost? Do you know who the fisherman was on the day of Pentecost? Who was it that threw the gospel net? His name was Peter, right? Let me ask you, had Peter and the disciples prayed for the power of God before the day of Pentecost? Notice Acts chapter 1 and verse 14. Acts chapter 1 and verse 14. I want to show you the living illustration of these fishing expeditions. Acts chapter 1 and verse 14. It says this, these all continued with one accord in prayer and supplication with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. So did they pray before the day of Pentecost as Jesus had asked them to do? Yes. And then did they receive power to witness? Of course. Notice Acts chapter 1 and verses 7 and 8. Acts chapter 1, 7 and 8. And he said to them, it is not for you to know times or seasons which the Father has put in his own authority, but you shall receive what? Power, when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. And you shall be what? Witnesses to me in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. So they prayed for power. Jesus told them to wait for the power. And then what did Peter do on the day of Pentecost? Peter threw out the net. Notice Acts chapter 2 and verse 14. Acts chapter 2 and verse 14. It says, but Peter, standing up with the 11, raised his voice and said to them, men of Judea, and all who dwell in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and heed my what? My words. They prayed for power. Peter received power. And now what does Peter do? He preaches, which in the parable, or in this story, this miracle, is what act? The act of throwing out what? Of throwing out the net. Now, was Peter successful after his sermon? Did he have a big number of fish as a result of throwing out the net? Yes. Notice Acts chapter 2 and verse 41. Acts chapter 2 and verse 41. It says, then those who gladly received his word were baptized. And that day about 3,000 souls were added to them. So how many fish did Peter fish on the day of Pentecost when he threw out the net because he had prayed and he had received the power? 3,000 human fish, if you please. And then let me ask you, what did he do once he fished those fish? Where did he put them? Notice Acts chapter 2 and verse 47. Acts chapter 2 and verse 47. It says, praising God and having favor with all the people. And now notice, and the Lord added to the what? To the church daily those who were being saved. So where did he put the fish after he fished them? In the what? In the church, which is the boat. Now why was Peter successful in this fishing expedition on the day of Pentecost? We find a hint of the reason in Acts chapter 4 and verse 13. Acts chapter 4 and verse 13. First of all, it was because Peter obeyed the command of Jesus to fish, right? He said, you're going to be witnesses to me, and I'm going to give you the power. Is that correct? We find that in Acts chapter 1 and 2. They prayed for power. They are empowered. Peter throws out the net. He catches 3,000 fish, and he puts them where? In the boat. Now, why was he successful? Notice Acts chapter 4 and verse 13. Now, when they, that is the people who were listening, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated and untrained, they marveled. And they realized that they had the best fishing techniques, that they had the best fishing equipment, that they fished in the best place, that they fished at the best time. No. What was the secret? It says, once again, and they realized that they had been with Jesus. What was it that gave success? It was the fact that they were with Jesus. And so if we want the church to be full, we don't just pray and say, Jesus, fill the church. You have the power to do it. Get the people streaming through the doors. No. We need to pray for the power, but then we need to go out and we need to throw out the net without fear. Because the main reason why people don't do missionary work and don't reach out to souls is because they're afraid. What if they ask something I don't know how to answer? What if they slam the door in my face? What if they insult me? By the way, all of these are selfish reasons. Because it's all about me. See, what if they offend me? What if they slam the door on me? What if there's a question that I cannot answer? The fact is that if Jesus commands, go out and fish, and I will give you power to fish, if we throw out the net, He will give us success in fishing. Now, allow me to give you an illustration in closing. I want to compare the church to a power plant. Just a little bit of a different illustration. Let me ask you, can you have the transformers, the cables, and the towers, and the wires, and the bulbs all in place, and yet not have light? Sure. What's missing? What's missing is the power. You can have all of the technology in place, but unless you have the power, there is no what? There is no light. Is it possible for the church to have the best Bible studies, the best building, the best music, the best programming, the best felt want seminars, and yet not be successful in the task of reaching souls for Jesus? Yes, because what is lacking? What is lacking is the power. But when the power plant, which is the church, is energized by the power of God, as a result there is light. There is success in the endeavor of fishing. And folks, Jesus promises that if we unite our human effort with His divine power, there will be success. Because the Word of God does not fail. It does not return unto Jesus void, but it accomplishes that for which He sent it. Let us not forget this very important lesson.